Seline, a towering 99-foot Bolin female, stood like a monolith before the breeding council. Her hands were clasped tightly behind her back, but her nerves betrayed her. A faint tremble echoed in her rigid stance. The chamber, a grand structure fit for beings far shorter than herself, seemed claustrophobic. She ducked slightly to avoid the crystalline chandelier. The head counselor, barely reaching her knee in height, cleared his throat, his tone both grave and bureaucratic. "Seline," he began, pausing for dramatic effect that only annoyed her. "You are deemed too tall to breed." Her heart sank. The size discrepancy poses an unacceptable risk to our males. He gestured to a holographic diagram of a Bolin couple, a stick-thin male cowering beneath a hilariously exaggerated version of Seline. The assembled council murmured in agreement. Celine's jaw tightened. "You're saying it's not my genes, but my size?" "Precisely," the counselor replied, as though this was a compliment. "Your dimensions are incompatible. Even the reinforced couches we commissioned for experimentation last year failed." A low, collective sigh from the chamber followed his remark. Celine's shoulders slumped. The dream of motherhood that had fueled her through years of isolation and awkward stares from smaller males was officially dashed. As she turned to leave, the alarm screamed. A scarlet glow filled the chamber, and the floor rumbled. Outside, a streak of fire and smoke blazed across the horizon. "What now?" Seline muttered, irritation overriding her grief. The council bolted for the windows like panicked geese, staring at the source of the chaos. A human diplomatic shuttle making a fiery descent. The craft skidded onto the spaceport, barely holding together as it groaned to a stop. Moments later, the hatch hissed open, and a figure emerged, coughing dramatically. Johnny Dixon, 6 feet 4 inches of pure, disheveled earthling, stumbled onto the tarmac, his suit jacket somehow managing to stay on despite the crash. He waved at the gathering Bolin crowd. "Sorry about the entrance. Parking on alien worlds is a nightmare." The Bolins exchanged bewildered glances. Was he joking? Johnny stood before the same breeding council, though he had to bend slightly to fit under the low beams. His attempt at charm had worked on exactly 0 Bolins thus far. "You are human Dixon," the head counselor said, trying and failing to project authority. "We face a dire crisis. Our species is on the brink of extinction. Due to size discrepancies between our tallest females and males, reproduction has become complicated." Johnny scratched the back of his neck. "You want me to play matchmaker or something?" The counselor cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable. "Not exactly. You might be the solution. Your size, while still shorter than our females, is significantly more compatible. We propose an unprecedented arrangement." "Arrangement?" Johnny repeated slowly, side-eyeing the Bolin woman who had just entered the chamber. Seline stepped forward, her enormous frame dwarfing even Johnny's impressive earthling height. For the first time, their eyes met. She was stunning in a way Johnny had never encountered. Sharp features, glimmering azure skin, and an expression that oscillated between curiosity and embarrassment. The counselor continued, oblivious to the awkward tension. "Seline is one of our most genetically suitable females. We ask that you consider becoming a breeding partner to save our species." Johnny's jaw dropped. He looked at the council, then at Seline, then back at the council. "You're serious?" "As serious as our extinction," the counselor deadpanned. Seline crossed her arms, her enormous biceps rippling beneath her silver armor. "This isn't exactly my ideal day either, human," she quipped, though her tone was laced with a mix of hope and sarcasm. Johnny blinked. "You think I'm just gonna jump in? No wine? No dinner? No, how do you do?" "We can arrange refreshments," the counselor offered, completely missing the sarcasm. Seline sighed, covering her face with one large hand. "This is already worse than I imagined." Johnny tilted his head, a grin creeping onto his face. I was going to refuse outright. But I like you already. You've got guts and a sense of humor." He turned back to the council. "All right, I'll give it a go. But if this works, I'm naming the first kid Johnny Jr." Seline groaned, muttering, "I regret everything already." The chamber erupted into chatter, the council exchanging relieved nods. Somewhere in the background, someone said, "A miracle." Johnny crossed his arms, his smirk growing. "So, is there like a guidebook for this? Or are we winging it?" "We will begin with medical examinations," the counselor explained, as though reading from a manual. "Great," Johnny said with mock enthusiasm. Nothing like a little intergalactic poking and prodding to really set the mood. Seline rolled her eyes, but couldn't hide the faintest twitch of a smile. For the first time in a long while, hope sparked in her chest. Johnny sat in the medical facilities examination room, stripped down to a modest robe that felt suspiciously like it had been made for a child. He tugged at the hem in frustration, trying to cover more than the essentials. Across from him, Seline was similarly dressed, or rather, draped in an oversized Bolin medical gown that looked like it could double as a parachute. "This isn't awkward at all," Johnny muttered, swinging his legs as he waited for the doctors to finish calibrating their scanners. Seline arched a brow, her towering frame making even the oversized chair beneath her seem comically inadequate. "For someone who just agreed to save an entire species, you complain a lot." "Hey, my species invented sarcasm," Johnny shot back with a grin. "Also, I didn't know saving a species came with pantsless Wednesdays." Dr. Zara, the lead Bolin scientist, entered, completely ignoring their banter. She carried a holographic tablet that hummed faintly, displaying spinning models of DNA strands. Her expression was one of detached fascination as she studied the readouts. "Human physiology is peculiar," she said, her voice clipped and clinical. "Your cellular adaptability is impressive, but your genome is riddled with inefficiencies." "Gee, thanks, Doc," Johnny replied, leaning back. "I love a good ego boost before breakfast." Seline stifled a chuckle, earning a sharp glance from Zara. "Let's proceed," Zara said. "We need to test your biomechanical compatibility." Johnny blinked. "That sounds ominous. Does it involve needles? Electric shocks? Juggling flaming space rocks?" Seline, smirking now, leaned forward. "You're nervous, aren't you?" "Nervous?" Johnny scoffed. "Nah, I'm just mentally preparing for the possibility of alien probe-y things." Dr. Zura tapped her tablet. "It's a simple test of physical synchronicity. Please stand." Johnny and Seline rose. Though stand felt like a generous term for Johnny, whose head barely reached her midriff. Zara adjusted the holographic equipment, and the air around them shimmered as a glowing grid materialized, mapping their bodies in intricate detail. "Interesting," Zara murmured as she paced around them. "Your body proportions are complementary, but the size variance remains significant. We may need to develop mechanical supports." Johnny squinted at the doctor. "Supports? Like scaffolding?" Celine's laugh escaped before she could stop it. "Scaffolding? Oh, that's rich. Glad you're enjoying this," Johnny muttered, though he couldn't suppress a grin. After hours of tests, most of which involved poking, scanning, and one particularly embarrassing treadmill exercise, Johnny and Seline were granted a break. They sat in the facility's private dining area, a sleek room with glowing walls and a table that adjusted to their respective heights. A Bolin assistant served a spread of delicacies, alien fruits that shimmered like gemstones, steaming bowls of something resembling pasta, and a pitcher of glowing blue liquid. Seline took a sip of the drink and grimaced. "This tastes like melted engine parts." Johnny sniffed his cup. "Yeah, hard pass." He reached into his jacket, which he'd retrieved after the tests, and pulled out an emergency ration bar. "Always keep a backup plan." Seline eyed the unwrapped bar skeptically. "What is that? A building material?" "Close. It's peanut butter and chocolate. Here." He broke off a piece and handed it to her. Tentatively, Seline popped the piece into her mouth. Her eyes widened. "This is delicious. Why don't Bolins have this?" "Probably because you're all too busy building fancy spaceports and forgetting about dessert," Johnny quipped, leaning back. As they ate, the conversation turned to their worlds. "So," Seline said, her tone casual but her curiosity unmistakable, "what made you become a diplomat?" Johnny shrugged. "I wanted to see the stars, meet new people, help bridge the gaps between species. And, the perks are pretty great. Like crashing on an alien planet, and getting invited to life-altering science experiments. Seline snorted. You're oddly upbeat for someone who's about to engage in a unique partnership. Well, if I'm being honest, Johnny said, I'm trying not to think about it too hard. You. Seline paused, her gaze dropping to the table. I've spent my whole life feeling out of place, too big, too intimidating. This is the first time anyone's seen me as something more than just a problem to solve. Johnny softened. Hey, for what it's worth, I think you're incredible. Like genuinely. And not just because you can probably bench press a shuttle. Seline's cheeks darkened, an alien blush. Thank you, Johnny. The protesters outside the facility had doubled in number, their chants reverberating through the city. Grix, the stern-faced Bolin religious leader, stood at the forefront, his voice amplified by a holographic speaker. This unholy experiment is an affront to our ancestors, he bellowed. We cannot allow our species to be diluted by alien interference. The security forces held their ground, their faces grim. Tensions were high, and a confrontation seemed inevitable. Inside the facility, Johnny and Seline were oblivious to the growing unrest. For now, they focused on the task ahead, their banter and shared moments offering a brief respite from the weight of their mission. The facility's security alarms blared, red lights flashing in every corridor. Johnny jolted awake from the cot in his quarters, blinking groggily as a disembodied voice boomed over the comm system. Warning, perimeter breach detected. Unauthorized entry in progress. Fantastic, Johnny grumbled, yanking on his jacket. First I crash land, then I get volunteered for alien matchmaking, and now we've got intruders. Is there a normal day on this planet? He stumbled into the hallway, nearly colliding with Seline, who was already armed with what looked like a glowing staff. Her expression was sharp, determined, and for a moment, Johnny forgot the alarms entirely. What's going on? He asked, jogging to keep up with her long strides. Protesters, Seline said curtly. They've breached the outer gate. Protesters? You mean the angry mob screaming about unholy unions? Johnny gestured wildly. Great. Just what I needed. A fan club. Seline shot him a sideways glance, her mouth twitching into the faintest smirk. Stay close. If they're bold enough to break in, they might try something dangerous. Close is fine, Johnny quipped, eyeing the glowing staff nervously. But maybe not too close. You swing that thing like it owes you money. The pair arrived at the main atrium, where security forces had formed a defensive line against a wave of protesters. Grix, the self-proclaimed leader of the dissenters, stood at the forefront, his stern face lit ominously by a makeshift torch. This abomination cannot continue, Grix shouted, his voice amplified by a small hovering speaker drone. The purity of the Bolin people must be preserved. Johnny leaned toward Seline. Is it just me, or does this guy sound like the alien version of an internet troll? Seline ignored him, stepping forward to address the crowd. Her towering presence silenced many of the protesters, though Grix's scowl deepened. Enough of this nonsense, she bellowed, her voice echoing through the chamber. We're fighting to save our species, and you're here making things worse. Grix sneered. Save it? By corrupting it with alien DNA. He pointed dramatically at Johnny, who raised his hands in mock surrender. Why am I always the bad guy in these situations? Johnny muttered. Before Seline could respond, one of the protesters hurled a small device toward the security line. It detonated with a crackling burst of energy, sending several guards sprawling. Chaos erupted as the crowd surged forward. Guess we're doing this the hard way, Seline growled, gripping her staff tightly. Johnny ducked as another device zipped past his head. Do you guys ever solve problems with, I don't know, a polite conversation? Seline didn't answer. She was already in motion, swinging her staff with precision. The weapon emitted arcs of blue energy, dispersing the nearest protesters without serious harm. Johnny grabbed a loose metal rod from the ground and backed into a corner, fending off a particularly determined Bolin who seemed intent on tackling him. Hey, buddy, personal space. The protesters began to overwhelm the security forces. Amid the chaos, Grix made his move. He slipped past the skirmish, heading straight for the facility's main control panel. "He's going for the power grid," Seline shouted, catching sight of him. Johnny didn't hesitate. "I got this." He bolted after Grix, dodging flailing limbs and the occasional stray energy bolt. Grix reached the panel and began typing furiously on the interface, his intent clear: shut down the facility's defenses. "Oh no, you don't," Johnny yelled, sliding to a stop next to him. Grix turned, sneering. "You think a human can stop me?" Johnny didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed the nearest object, a steaming bowl and food tray, and smacked Grix across the head. The religious leader crumpled to the ground, dazed but conscious. "Never underestimate the power of cafeteria snacks," Johnny quipped, panting. He quickly locked the panel, then glanced over his shoulder to see Seline dispatching the last of the attackers with an impressive spin of her staff. "Nice work," she called, approaching him. "Thanks," Johnny replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "Though I might have given that guy a concussion." "Is that against intergalactic diplomacy rules?" Seline chuckled. "If it is, I won't tell." With the protesters subdued and security re-established, the facility staff began cleaning up the mess. Grix and his followers were detained, though the tension in the city was far from resolved. In the quiet aftermath, Johnny and Seline found themselves back in the private dining area. This time, the glowing blue drink didn't seem so bad. "You know," Johnny said, raising his glass, "for a diplomatic mission, this has been surprisingly action-packed." Seline laughed, a genuine, warm sound that caught Johnny off guard. "You have a knack for turning chaos into comedy." "It's a gift," he said, grinning. "By the way, if saving your species involves more food fights, I'm all in." Seline shook her head, but the smile lingered. "You're something else, Johnny Dixon, and you're not so bad yourself, Seline." For a 99-foot warrior princess. Their laughter echoed in the room, a brief moment of levity in the midst of the storm. But both knew that the real challenges, scientific, political, and personal, were just beginning. The facility hummed with subdued tension the next morning. The security breach had rattled everyone, but the focus remained on the mission at hand. Repairs were underway, new protocols were in place, and yet, whispers of doubt and unrest lingered in every corner. Johnny and Seline stood side by side in the observation room, their eyes fixed on a massive holographic display showing Bol Prime's political landscape. Red highlighted districts signified areas of growing unrest, many centered around the facility itself. "Well, this looks encouraging," Johnny said, sipping from a mug of Bol and brew that tasted suspiciously like motor oil. "If I didn't know better, I'd say this planet wants to kill me before I can save it." Seline sighed, her expression grim. The council underestimated how deeply some factions oppose this. Grix's capture has only emboldened them. Johnny raised a brow. "You think they're planning another party? Maybe with fewer explosive hors d'oeuvres this time?" Before Seline could respond, Dr. Zara swept into the room, her holographic tablet in hand. Her sharp eyes flicked between them as she approached. "Progress waits for no one," Zara declared. "We've scheduled the next stage of compatibility testing. I trust you're both ready?" Johnny smirked. "Depends. Are there fewer electrodes involved this time?" Zara ignored him, turning to Seline. "We'll need to conduct the neural link calibration. It's vital for ensuring synchronization during interactions." Seline stiffened slightly. "Neural link? That wasn't in the original plan." "It's a safeguard," Zara explained, her tone brisk. "Given the size and genetic differences, a direct neural connection will help bridge physiological gaps and prevent complications. It's entirely non-invasive." Johnny rubbed the back of his neck. "You know, every time you say non-invasive, I end up regretting it." Johnny lay on a sleek examination table, the cold surface doing little to ease his nerves. Wires connected to small nodes were affixed to his temples, glowing faintly. Across from him, Seline reclined in a similar setup, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to his fidgeting. "You look way too comfortable over there," Johnny said. Seline arched a brow. "You're the one who keeps asking for adventures. Consider this one of them." Before he could retort, Dr. Zara activated the neural link. A low hum filled the room as the equipment powered up, and Johnny's vision blurred momentarily. Then, without warning, a rush of sensations flooded his mind. Colors, sounds, and emotions that weren't his own. Whoa, Johnny gasped. Did I just taste blue? Seline chuckled softly. That's normal. You're experiencing my synaptic baseline. You're telling me your brain feels like a synthesizer concert? Johnny blinked. That's actually kind of cool. The connection deepened, and suddenly Johnny could feel Seline's presence, like a faint echo at the edge of his consciousness. Her strength, her determination, and an undercurrent of vulnerability he hadn't expected. It was all there, laid bare. Johnny? Seline's voice sounded both near and far, as if it resonated directly within his mind. Yeah, I hear you, he replied aloud, then realized he didn't need to. Thank you. Her laughter rippled through the link, warm and reassuring. Relax. It takes getting used to. While Johnny and Seline underwent their neural synchronization, the facility's lower levels buzzed with a more sinister energy. A shadowy figure slipped through the maintenance corridors, moving with practiced ease. The saboteur wore a nondescript uniform and carried a small device emitting faint pulses of red light. The target was clear, the facility's power core. A few well-placed disruptions would shut down the defenses, leaving the building vulnerable to another assault. As the figure approached the core chamber, they pulled out a data chip and inserted it into the console. The device began to override the security protocols, its screen flashing ominously. The saboteur muttered to themselves, for the purity of Bol Prime. Back in the examination room, Johnny and Seline's neural link took an unexpected turn. The connection surged, flooding Johnny's mind with vivid memories. Not his own, but Seline's. He saw flashes of her childhood, towering over her peers, struggling to fit into a world built for smaller beings. He felt her joy during her first flight in a Bolin starship, her pride in joining the Council's warrior corps, and her heartbreak at being deemed too tall to breed. Seline, Johnny whispered, overwhelmed. I didn't know. Seline's own gaze softened as she caught glimpses of Johnny's life in return. His memories came to her in bursts. A small boy running through green fields, his mother laughing as she chased him. The weight of leaving Earth to serve as a diplomat, the loneliness of always being the outsider, even among friends. Johnny, she began, her voice thick with emotion. Before either could say more, the lights flickered. The low hum of the facility's machinery sputtered, then faded into silence. Zara cursed under her breath, frantically tapping her tablet. We're losing power. This wasn't scheduled. The neural link severed abruptly, leaving Johnny and Seline gasping as they returned fully to their own minds. What the hell was that? Johnny demanded, sitting up. Zara's face was pale. A system failure. Possibly sabotage. She tapped her comm device. Security. Report to the power core immediately. Seline was already on her feet, her expression hardening. Johnny, stay here. I'll handle this. Johnny scoffed, grabbing his jacket. I didn't come all this way to sit on the sidelines. Seline hesitated, then nodded. Fine. Just try not to get yourself killed. The pair raced through the darkened corridors, emergency lights casting eerie red shadows on the walls. They reached the power core chamber just as a small explosion rocked the facility, sending a plume of smoke into the air. Inside, the saboteur was cornered by security forces but held a small detonator in their hand. Stay back, or I'll finish the job, the saboteur barked. Johnny stepped forward, hands raised in mock surrender. Hey, easy there, buddy. No need to blow us all to smithereens. Let's talk this out, yeah? The saboteur sneered. You're the human. You're the reason this abomination is happening. Abomination? Johnny glanced at Seline. Wow, I usually don't get called that until the second date. Seline stifled a laugh, but her focus remained on the saboteur. Stand down. You're outnumbered. The saboteur hesitated, their grip on the detonator faltering. In that split second, Seline moved with lightning speed, disarming them with a single strike of her staff. The detonator clattered to the floor, and security swarmed in to apprehend the intruder. Johnny let out a low whistle. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Seline turned to him, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "You're already on my bad side, Dixon." "Good to know," he said, grinning. As the facility system slowly came back online, Johnny and Seline stood together, watching the security team haul the saboteur away. "This mission keeps getting crazier," Johnny said. "Welcome to Bol Prime," Seline replied, her tone dry, but her eyes glinting with admiration. Johnny chuckled. "You know what? I think I'm starting to like it here."